So we're going to talk about what is, what we call cardiorespiratory fitness. So what is this ability that you have to use the heart and the lungs and your capillaries and then the aerobic metabolic machinery like mitochondria in your muscle fibers? What is it about all of those working together that lets us make ATP and lets us have sort of endurance exercise capabilities? This is called cardiorespiratory fitness. I showed you guys the data, right, where grip strength predicts mortality in old people, right? You guys remember all of that? And we freaked out and we're like, oh God, I don't have very good grip strength. I've seen some of your labs, all that stuff. I've got most of that grade. I just need to enter them. You guys did well. But you guys were like, oh God, I'm below the normative value for grip strength. Am I going to die really, really soon? And those things. Of all of the things that we do, of all of the stuff that we can measure, kind of all physiological variables, the thing that is likely to be the single best predictor of lifespan, and quality of life is cardiorespiratory fitness. This variable, this is the thing. It's good to be strong. That's good. But this is because the things that kill us are oftentimes cardiovascular disease related or related to type 2 diabetes. And so this variable, much more so than kind of absolute strength, incorporates cardiovascular system function. So people that have higher levels of cardiorespiratory fitness, you have a better endurance capacity from both a running or walking or cycling, and we'll talk about that, you have a lower mortality risk. The really cool thing about all of this that we already mentioned on like the first day of class that I'm going to come back to, because it may be one of the most important things in practice, that we can do with all of the stuff in America, given some of our health problems, is that high levels of cardiorespiratory fitness offset almost all of the bad things that happen because of obesity, because of excess fat, or excess weight, depending on how you want to define all of this. We don't usually use this term anymore, but when this was come up with originally about 20 or 25 years ago, they called it fat but fit, which is probably not a very kind of body positive way of approaching these things. But there was this discussion on, is it the things that drive mortality rate, is it due to obesity, or is it due to fitness levels, strength and cardiorespiratory fitness? And what we find is that while there are definitely some bad things that happen with obesity, if you can maintain cardiorespiratory fitness, a lot of that stuff goes away. Now, within people that are, at the same fitness level, if you have less obesity, you're even better off. This is a really good thing. So we're going to come back to that and show some data on all of these things. So what you see on this slide, this is relative risk here on the y-axis. This is relative risk of dying from anything, all-cause mortality. So we just take a group of people and we see everybody that dies, basically out of that in some period of time. We have set this odds ratio that the sort of comparison group for this particular comparison are people that are sedentary, they're not active, and they have low levels of cardiorespiratory fitness. Then we break everybody else out into what we call quartiles. You're in the sort of bottom 25% of people. You're in the next 25%. You're in the third 25%, or you're in the top 25%. And what you see here on these data are the top line here. This is physical activity. So this is very simply how much activity are you getting? Doesn't matter what it is. Are you walking? Are you running? Are you biking? Are you standing because of work? Are you walking because of work? It's just activity. And you will note with activity, there is what we call a dose response. right? No activity, greater chance of dying from anything. And there's this progressive decline, whereas I become sort of higher and higher on the activity spectrum, my risk of dying from anything is going to go down. Okay. Now, in the same group of people, if we look not at physical activity, but we look at our measure of cardiorespiratory fitness, which is a parameter called VO2 max. If we look at VO2 max data, I want you guys to note that there's a greater drop in relative risk if we can become more fit rather than just simply being active. Okay? And we'll kind of talk about not all physical activity is created the same. Some physical activity or some exercise at some intensities and things are going to be what drive these changes in these improvements in fitness. So fitness as measured by VO2 max is one of the best ways to predict mortality. If you can raise your fitness, then you can decrease your all-cause mortality very, very powerfully. Okay. So we're going to start off by talking a little bit about how do we test this. Okay, how do we test it, and then how do we prescribe in order to improve it, and then what are some of the adaptations that take place if we do that all the way. Okay, why test? So this is very much going to look like what we did, resistance training. Okay, we want to know how fit are you right now. Okay, how fit are you now? Right? How fit is Sophie in comparison to Madison? In comparison to Hensley? Okay, in comparison to Pepper. We want to know how fit you guys are. We can use all of this as we test cardiorespiratory fitness. We can monitor people during that test. These last longer, so it's not just like a one-off strength test. So we can track what's happening to your heart rate, to your cardiac output, to your EKG, to your breathing. Okay, we can track physiological responses during the exercise battle. For some kinds of cardiovascular disease, we need to use this test to be able to identify it. Okay? You will manifest during exercise, but not at rest. We'll talk about more results. It gives us a basis for exercise program. Knowing your or estimating your VO2 max gives us the aerobic exercise analog to maximal strength. Okay? We want to prescribe an intensity of aerobic exercise relative to your maximal cardiorespiratory fitness. Okay? Rather than being at 70% of one rep max when you're going to go lift weights, we want to be at 70% of VO2 max when we run. Okay. As I said, it helps us screen for coronary heart disease or coronary artery disease. We'll probably do more of this when we get into the pathology of cardiovascular disease. It can determine your ability to perform a specific work task. Okay. Some tasks require you to carry things, to move repetitively. They require a certain level of cardiorespiratory fitness in order for you to do that task. Right. My job is to load boxes on trucks at Amazon. I have to do that over and over again. So I got to carry things, and I got to walk, and I got to walk up things, and I got to walk back down. Or you carry things up and down flights of stairs. And so we can test this to figure out if you have the capacity to do this. Okay? It can give us some information if we retest about whether or not our program has been effective. If you're trying to train to get better, and then we retest your VO2 max and you haven't gotten any better, then we know, okay, this isn't working. Okay? And then we can use that to revise our goals and measure effectiveness of programs. It's all the same kind of stuff that we tend to do with our clients. Okay? As I mentioned, I'm sure some of you guys have seen or heard this thing before. The measure of cardiorespiratory fitness. You guys are going to estimate this in lab number 2 is something called VO2 max. That stands for the maximum volume of oxygen that you can take up at the lungs, get into your bloodstream, distribute to your muscles through your cardiovascular system, and then take in and use in your muscles to make ATP. So it's a measure of maximal, what we call aerobic capacity, your ability to use oxygen to make ATP. And I see you, Madison, doing it this way, okay? Doing it this way is going to limit fatigue. Aerobic metabolism lets us have this somewhat unlimited capacity to make ATP without making byproducts that will make our muscles burn or make our lung function kind of go down. This is the way that we can do this and continue to go forward. Okay, Madison.
I think someone who is like really like their own health muscle, but they have something like cystic fibrosis. I'm assuming that would like affect their VO2 max.
Absolutely, yes. If you don't have, and this is what we're going to say. So let me do this, and I'll use yours as an example. Okay. Because what we call VO2 max is what we call an integrative measure. It's integrated. It is, you have to have good functioning in multiple physiological systems. They all work together in concert. So if you have cystic fibrosis, let's just say, or you have coronary artery disease, or you have peripheral arterial disease, or there are some people that have what we call mitochondrial myopathies, where the mitochondria don't work. If you have a specific impairment in the heart, in the lungs, in blood vessels, in your mitochondria, or something in your muscles, any of those places can be a limiting factor. And the whole system only works as well as the worst functioning unit that is all in there. Does that make sense, guys? Okay. So what we will see, and I'll show you guys some values, what we see is in generally people that have pulmonary disorders, you have chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, you have emphysema, you've got cystic fibrosis. Pulmonary patients very often tend to be the people that have the lowest VO2 maxes, followed by people that have cardiovascular disease, especially if they're post-heart attack or something. They have impaired coronary arteries, or they have congestive heart failure, and then we have the effects of just being sick. Okay? The way that in the lab we would test all of this, okay? The way that we would test all of this is we give you an increasing amount of work to do, okay? So I could, see if I can do this. I'm really hurting myself. Okay? When I was younger, I used to do a lot more of these kinds of things in class. I should get back to that. I would do something like this, all right? This is called a step test. So I'm stepping up and I'm stepping down. If I go to certain cadence, right, that provides some level of work. So if you look at my graph here, we have work rate on the X, and we have measured oxygen uptake or measured VO2 here on the Y. As my work rate goes up, so I'm stepping up onto the step at some cadence, okay, that increases my energy expenditure over rest. If I step up faster, then that makes the work rate go up. Or if we make the step taller and taller, that would also make it more difficult. Okay? So, see how out of shape I am. I did like 3 steps up on there and I'm out of breath. Okay? Being old sucks. Being out of shape and old sucks worse. We put you generally on a treadmill and you pick a comfortable speed. And you start off with the treadmill level, and you go a couple of minutes at say 6 miles an hour, you're jogging, and then it's been 2 minutes, we raise the incline up 2%. And you go another 2 minutes, and we raise the incline up 2 more percent, and 2 more, and 2 more, and 2 more. So every couple of minutes, we make it progressively more difficult, we make the work rate go up, and we should see a corresponding increase in your oxygen use, okay? In how much energy we're getting from aerobic metabolism, that's going to go up. At some point, though, at some point, we increase work rate, and your VO2 doesn't go up anymore, okay? That means it plateaus off like all of this. That will then represent your maximal oxygen uptake. You're able to do additional work because you're going to call in anaerobic metabolism, although in a lot of instances, you're not ever going to see a plateau because you get tired or fatigued before all of that, okay? And we see that, and now we know what your maximal rate is. You can do that on the treadmill, you can do it on a bike, you can do it on a step test, you can do it in a whole number of different ways.
So some Apple Watches have the function to like track the VO2 max. How accurate do you think that is?
So we saw a thing. We saw a presentation at our conference last week where there was a girl who was showing some data, and she used to work for, not for Apple, but for another sort of fitness tracking group. And she said that most of those things are based on an algorithm developed by a Norwegian company, and all of their original data that it's based on is from Norwegian cross-country skiers who are incredibly fit. And so it doesn't work particularly great in, we'll just say, an average unfit American in that way, that it tends to overestimate, which I find that most of the fitness trackers do that anyway. They overestimate how fit you are, they overestimate how many calories you burn, probably because it makes people feel better about themselves. But what it's doing, and we'll see this in a few minutes, okay, is it knows your age, it probably knows your height and your weight that you have to enter in. And then does it have you do a certain protocol before it does that? Or is it just base it on, like, I went for a walk and I was at this pace and my heart rate was like, do you know what do you have to do to get it to give you the
I
VO2?
think it just requires you to like log an outdoor run.
Log an outdoor. Okay. So what it's doing is it's making an estimate of what your work rate was based upon, I'm outdoors, it has the GPS on, right? It estimates how fast you were going, like how far did you go, and then it measures your heart rate at that work rate. And so, and then from that, it does some sophisticated estimations and calculations to try to extrapolate out what's going on. Okay. Now, you guys are going to do for lab, and Sophie, does yours do this? Like, I don't think mine does.
You have to go to your activity.
Do I? Okay. So if yours,
So you have to be 20 years of age or older.
so
Be outside, walk,
any of you guys that have this, if you would be willing, we can run an experiment when we do our second lab. Because what you guys are going to do is you guys are going to walk for 6 minutes. I'm going to tell you guys to find a place that's flat, that's straight, okay? And you're going to walk as fast as you can and cover as much ground as you can in 6 minutes. And based upon sex, weight, age, resting heart rate, okay, and the distance that you cover in all of that, we can get, with about maybe a plus or minus 10% error, we're going to estimate what your VO2 max is. So we'll do it that way. I mean, if you guys can get it on the exact same walk or something from the watch, then let's see what it does in those ways. It's probably not too bad. But I mean, it's going to be a very gross measure that you're like, okay, I am woefully not very fit. And somebody else, one of you guys may be really fit. And so, you know, your VO2 is going to be twice what mine is. You know, is it really going to be, it tells you your VO2 is 50. Is it really 50? Maybe it's 47 or 48, or maybe it's 52, right? But it might know that you're 50 and somebody else is 25. Okay. I did not know that the Apple Watch would be, all right, I'm just throwing this off. We're just not going to tell my wife until I come home with COVID, I guess. So, okay. All right. So what VO2 max represents is the maximal capacity, right, to transport all of these things. So there's this physiological components. Remember, I wrote the thick equation out for you guys the other day where we can see that VO2 is equal to cardiac output multiplied by a VO2 difference, the arterial venous oxygen difference. Okay. So things that go into your VO2 max are heart rate, and stroke volume. Cardiac output is a big predictor. Okay? A big predictor. So whichever of you has the largest cardiac output is likely going to have the largest VO2 max. Okay? And then additionally, the AVO2 difference is one of our ways to try to estimate how well the mitochondria in your muscles are able to get oxygen out of the capillaries and then use it. So if we know those two things, we can, from the Fick equation, we can estimate what your VO2 max is. So when we do exercise training and I make your stroke volume get bigger because your heart gets bigger, it makes your VO2 max go up. Okay? When you age like I do, and I'm probably twice as old as most of you guys in class, I lost max heart rate in comparison to you guys. So my VO2, I'm starting at a disadvantage from you guys because my cardiac output will be less because I have a lower max heart rate. Okay? And so you can make a VO2 difference go up when you train, you get more capillaries, you get more mitochondria. So all of those things are going to be kind of in our equations in here. So let's think about some regular values for this. The units on this are going to be a little bit strange, I'm guessing, for you guys, but just bear with me and we'll do the best we can. So the values for an average college-aged woman is probably going to be somewhere between like 30 and 40 milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body weight per minute. Okay, so we say it's in mLs per kg per minute. Guys, you all tend to have a slightly larger, on average, VO2 max. Typical college-age males between 35 and 45, thereabouts. Okay, elite female distance athletes can usually get into the mid-60s to low 70s. Elite male distance athletes are going to be somewhere from the mid-70s to the mid-80s. I believe the highest ever recorded VO2 max in a guy is like 97 or 98. And in women, it's like 79 or 80, right about there. Okay. Those values tend to be in Norwegian cross-country skiers. And we'll talk about why that is in a minute. You can see people that are myocardial patients, so their post-heart attack are somewhere between 18 and 22, and then pulmonary patients maybe 13 to 15. Okay, 13 to 15, you can't walk upstairs. Okay, you can barely, like, it is maximal exercise for you to simply walk around, right? To walk around slowly in that way. Okay. If you're at 20, you can probably walk around, but stairs are going to be tough. And walking at any more than kind of just a slow crawl is going to really tax you. Okay. So that's what our numbers are going to be. So you guys will get to see when you estimate yours, where do you fall in the midst of all of this? Madison.
So in like a clinical study,
Yes.
so the person with cystic fibrosis or whoever, if you did a VO2 max test, is there a way to see that like somebody's heart is the issue versus their lungs?
Yes. I mean, in theory, there is.
Is there like some kind of measurement that comes from the test, or is it like calculations that then it's just like estimated?
So it's a good question. Think about how to explain this and not bore everybody else in class to pieces.
Or I guess I'm wondering, in a clinical setting, would there be an easier way to do that as opposed to doing a VO2 max test?
So part of what you can do is when you do the test, if you do a true max test, so like one of my, you guys probably got an email about it, and another volunteer, but one of my master students is doing VO2 max testing as part of her thesis right now. So we get a printout at the end of everything. We look to see, did it look like it was a good test? Did people try as hard as they could? So we can look at, like, what is your maximal heart rate during the test? What is your maximal ventilation during the test? And so if you have a person that had cystic fibrosis, right, what's likely to happen is their test is going to end and their VO2 is going to be low, and you're going to look, and they're not going to have reached some of the age predicted markers that their cardiac output was as high as it could be. Like, their max heart rate might be 160 beats per minute, let's just say, and they quit the test at 130, right? Which would tell us that they probably, cardiovascularly, they had some room to continue going. But they're like, no, I can't breathe or something. But you probably do a spirometry test as well, determine there's a pulmonary limitation. So there's some ways that you can identify all of those things. Yes. Okay. So there are a few other things that we need to take into consideration when we look at your values. Okay. So the type of test that we do matters. VO2 max, okay, is dependent upon the amount of muscle mass that you are activating during a test. Okay? So running tends to get us the highest VO2 max values because you're using your arms and your legs and sort of your low back and your abdominals to kind of hold your posture. Okay? Cycling tends to, you lose 5 or 10% when you do a cycling test because you're not using your arms nearly as much. Swinging the arms, while not particularly like a limiting factor when you run, it is more muscle mass. You need to get blood flow to those places, and so it needs to go up. In some clinical populations, they have leg issues, and so they do arm crank cycling. Anybody ever seen this? Okay, we do arm cranking. You arm crank, it's maybe 2/3 to 3/4 of what your running value would be. We did a study about 10 years ago. We were looking at the effects of caffeine on some stuff, and we did arm crank cycling VO2 max test. And you would finish the max test, right? And your arms don't work anymore. You can't crank the bike anymore, and you're barely out of breath. You're like not even breathing that hard. It's the strangest feeling ever, but you're limited because it's just my arms. I don't have to tax my cardiovascular system because I don't need that much blood. It's just blood to my arms. I can get that without maxing out cardiac output, right? But there's only so much that they can do. And so some really interesting things that we're going to do there. Okay. Genetics matter. Genetics matter. There's some very famous study conducted at the Pennington Biomedical Research Center in Baton Rouge called the Heritage Study. As part of all of that, they studied identical twins, as well as people that were like brothers and sisters and moms and dads. And they found that somewhere between 1/4 to almost 50% of the VO2 max differences among people can be explained by genetics. Okay. A lot of that we think now is a familial linkage in mitochondrial function, which our new faculty member, Dr. Vellers, Heather studies the genetics of mitochondria. Okay. The genetics of your mitochondria came from your mom, right? Mitochondria have their own DNA that is separate from regular cellular DNA. You got your mitochondria from your mom, right? So if you have a good VO2 max, thank your mom. If you have a sucky VO2 max, curse your mom, right? Somewhere in the midst of all of that. So there is some genetics to all of this, okay? Your training status matters. I showed you guys this, right? Where we did the thing. Being sedentary is a problem. You're going to have a lower VO2 max value. You run every day for like 5 miles, you're probably going to have higher value. Men tend to have higher values than women. That is mostly driven by one of the primary physiological differences between men and women. What do you guys think that is? Size, okay. We're normalizing our values to body weight, so we're making some accounting for size. You're not 100% wrong. But what is it? Yes, many of you ladies are a little bit smaller than the gentlemen in the class, but what else is different? Longer muscles, okay, sure. Ladies, I know y'all are the last people to whom I need to remind that you are physiologically designed for childbirth, right? You very often may get monthly reminders. of all of those things. So what else does your body do? Okay. That prepares you for childbirth. It is different than what happens in men. You have more of something than the guys do, and it's all about childbirth. It is driven by the hormones. It is driven by those things. Yes. But what is it? Body fat. Body fat. We'll talk about body composition after all of this. But in general, women have per any weight. You take a guy and a girl and they weigh the same. The guy is going to have a lower percent body fat than the woman almost all of the time. VO2 max is very much dependent upon how much lean body mass you have, how much muscle you have, because you use the oxygen in the muscles. Ladies, because you all have somewhat proportionally more fat per any given amount of weight, so you have energy reserves in case you get pregnant, okay? You tend to have lower VO2 max values. If we can match for training status, if we can match for body composition, we can match for body size, then we can make most of those sex differences like get washed away and go away. Okay? So that's what we've got. Young versus old, age matters. Young people have higher because you have a higher max heart rate. Okay? You should have a higher cardiac output than older people. So that matters. Altitude and air pollution matter. If you're at sea level, you'll have a higher VO2 max value, right? Nothing inside you changes. There's just more oxygen in the air, and that would be better. And obviously, disease states affect one of the primary systems. You guys have questions about any of that? Okay. So I've shown you data in two different ways, so I should probably put this first, and I'll explain it here. When we measure oxygen consumption, you get two different recordings of what it looks like, okay? The first is something called an absolute VO2, and the units of absolute VO2 is liters per minute. So this is just in sum total how much oxygen is coming in and getting into your muscles, okay? This makes no account for body size or muscle mass or anything else. If you look at absolute VO2s, people that are bigger, okay, you're just bigger, you should have a larger absolute VO2, okay? Because you're bigger, you're going to have to carry that bigger body size around, you're going to have more muscle in order to do all of that, so you're going to have a necessarily larger absolute VO2. If we want to know something about an individual person, absolute VO2 is fine, right? It tells us plenty about that person. But it does not allow for easy or accurate comparisons among people. People that are of different ages, men and women, people that have different body compositions, people that have different training statuses. Statuses? I don't know, something. Okay? So we do a normalization to body weight. So we take our liters per minute, we convert the liters to milliliters, and then we divide by your body weight in kilograms, and that gives us this relative VO2 value that we see expressed in mLs per kg per minute. All of the normative values that you guys are going to see, the values you're going to get when you do your lab, are going to be relative VO2 values that will allow us then to compare among all of you in class, which we will do. Okay. Don't worry about METs, but generally, one MET that we talked about way back at the start of class, one MET, or your resting metabolic rate, is the equivalent of about 3.5 mLs per kg per minute of oxygen consumption. So if you're at 2 METs, you're at 7, right? If you're at 3 METs, you're at 10.5. If you're at 4 METs, which is walking, right? Then you're at about 14, which is why if you're a pulmonary patient, walking is sometimes okay. Those are our general kinds of ways. Okay. So we talked about how to do a maximal test already. I put you on a treadmill or on a bike, and I increase the speed or the grade, and I just say run until you give out. okay? I can remember the first time that I ever did one of these tests. I was a grad student, and we were more than a little bit competitive with each other. We were doing it for one of our classes. And I essentially ran on the treadmill until like the world was closing into a pinprick. Like I was having a hard time getting oxygen. It was like, I'm going to go until I basically pass out. Okay. Good for me. It was pretty stupid, but that's a maximal test. Okay. We hook you up to our metabolic cart. We collect all the air you're breathing out, and we get a measure of what your max is. Okay. A true max test is done on a treadmill. Okay. Any other piece of exercise equipment, any other exercise modality that's not running is oftentimes called a peak VO2 test. We put you on the bike, it's a peak test. Because if we put you on the treadmill, you probably get a little bit higher. Okay? That means way more to our grad students because people get really fussy about if you call it a max test or a peak test. I just want to expose you guys to this. Okay? Now, this requires special equipment. We're not going to do this in our lab. If you want to come be in my grad student study, we can get this for you. If you want to take exercise phys lab class, you will do, or you have the option to do a max test. Okay. Right, Madison, did you do the max test last semester? No, you didn't. So one of our other grad students, undergraduate friends. Okay. Anyway, never mind. But what we're going to do, okay, and what is commonly, much more commonly done is something called a submaximal test. During a submaximal test, we don't have to collect the gas that you're breathing out. We're going to estimate your VO2 max based upon primarily your heart rate response and some sort of work output at that corresponding heart rate response, either on the bike or on the treadmill or during a step test or something like that. Okay? There is a very, very tight relationship between heart rate and oxygen consumption during exercise. That's why all of your watches measure heart rate now. Okay? That's why when we get back next week, we're going to talk about how we prescribe exercise of an aerobic nature to people, and we want to prescribe it based upon a target heart rate. You need to go exercise today, and you need to be at this heart rate because that is going to be our estimate of what percentage of VO2 max you're at. So here you see this, we have heart rate on the y-axis, and you have VO2 on the x. As VO2 goes up, there's this corresponding increase. So if we know what your heart rate is, okay, during some bout of exercise, I'm stepping up and down on the chair. We know what my heart rate is. We know what that work rate is. We know how much I weigh. We know my linear displacement distance. We can calculate work. We can get my heart rate. If this relationship is linear, right? If you know a point here and a point here, as we make our work rate go up, we can see what our kind of the slope of the line is. And then all you got to do then is just extrapolate out to the end. And you can guess that at max heart rate, my work rate would be X. That work rate requires a certain amount of energy. And you can estimate that. Okay. That is basically what you're going to do. We're going to do it from distance covered or walking test. When we had class in person, we had labs in person, we would put you on a bike and you would ride at a certain rate. We'd measure your heart rate. We'd increase the work on the bike. We'd measure your heart rate again. Right? We do that 3 or 4 times. And we would take you up to about 80% of your max heart rate. And then we would guess out at what your VO2 max was. So it turns out that way is the way we did it was wildly inaccurate because part of it was dependent upon what your initial heart rate was. And everybody was real freaked out because it was lab and you had to like exercise in front of other people and put a heart rate monitor on and all of these other sorts of things. Okay. I'm doing a no now. I'm gonna flip my mask around because the fuzzies are tickling my face. There we go. All right. So that's what we're gonna do. Okay. Now, if we look at this, right, maximal versus submaximal test, which one are you going to do? A lot of it is going to be dependent upon equipment and personnel. In most places, you guys are not going to be where you have a metabolic cart. You're not going to be in a place where it's going to be easy to do an actual test. Most of you don't have a lab available. But if you have a treadmill or you have a bike or you have a place where you can go and walk, you can do a very, very easy submaximal test, and you can do it in pretty much anybody. So you work in the PT clinic, you can have them walk for a little while, and you can figure out what their VO2 max is. You work in a hospital, and there's a doctor. There's a movement. I had some presentations about that last week as well, about trying to make VO2 max and strength and things a vital sign. Like you go to the doctor and they take your blood pressure and they do all of those kinds of things. And they ask you about this. We've at least gotten where they consider BMI now as like part of a vital sign. They would measure your heart, those things. About making VO2 max and strength and these exercise capacity things, because they're so highly predictive of disease states, making them part of a vital sign. I have a former student who did his master's with me, but he works as an exercise physiologist at a hospital in Tulsa, and he does testing on these people. Like that's what he does. Is they do VO2 max estimating, mostly on people that are post heart attack when they go into cardiac rehab. Like, so there are jobs that you could get with an undergraduate or a master's degree in these things, doing testing like this for people. It's kind of some really interesting stuff. We are hopeful that we can do a better job of convincing the medical industry. It's really not the doctors you have to convince, it's the insurance companies that you have to convince. Right? So you need the insurance companies to be willing to reimburse for the time and the test, to pay for the tech to do it, and all of those things. And that drives a lot of things. We'll get into talking about healthcare when we do some other things. I have health insurance is great if you have it. It's also a huge pain in the ass when you have it, because for whatever's going on, people at Blue Cross and Blue Shield decide what gets covered. They decide what treatment you can get based upon what they will cover, right? Or the people we're now at Cigna, because Blue Cross and Blue Shield was arguing with the Health Science Center over reimbursement rates, and so we dropped them as part of a negotiating ploy. So I have some. It's good, they do some good things, but also, dear Lord, just like about good. These are data from the study that I took our estimation equation. This is the 6-minute walk. So you can see how far in meters you walk in 6 minutes, and then the estimation to peak VO2. This is an older individuals. Their peak VO2s are about 30. We've had folks in previous semesters doing this, getting the 50s or the 60s. If you get up into the 60s, for some of you, I'm like, are you running? Like during all, like people have gone like a whole kilometer in 6 minutes, and I'm like, are you running? Because it's hard to walk that fast. But it's a reasonably kind of tight-ish linear relationship between all of these. So that's what you guys are going to do. Okay. There are some other field tests that are out there that people do. You guys didn't do this, but you could have taken your presidential physical fitness stuff when you were in like elementary school or junior high. You guys remember doing that? You just have to like run a mile. I remember it was a big deal when I was in the 6th grade that we had to run a mile. And we ran it in the fall, and then we had to run it again in the spring. And it was a big deal about like, hey, if you can go this much faster than whatever you did last time, then you get an extra 15 minutes at recess or something. But you can do a 1 mile walk test, your heart rate on those things. There's a 1 mile run test. You can run a 1.5 miles or run 12 minutes. There's some things like that. I think it's one of the basic training, one of the military tests is either 1.5 miles or it's 12 minutes, and you have to make a certain distance or make a certain time to kind of get certain ranks and those kinds of things. So all of them are going to kind of roughly determine that. So what you can take from this, the take home is the higher my VO2 max in a very general sense, okay, the farther I can run or cycle, and the faster I can run or cycle for any particular distance. A higher VO2 max should make you a better endurance athlete. Okay? A better endurance athlete. So if you want to run a 5K faster, you need a higher VO2 max. Right? You want to run a half marathon faster, or you just want to run a half marathon. Right? I'd settle for running a 5K at this point. I ran 2 miles in 4 intermittent half-mile bursts yesterday, and I like to die. Felt like Michael Scott in the Office episode where they were running the 5K there on those kinds of things. So, but that's what this is all. What all of this is gonna tell us. Okay. You can probably envision a test question where you do these field tests like the 1 mile runs or the 6-minute walk test, these submaximal tests versus doing a lab test, right? The advantages of the field tests, they're quicker, they're easier, they're inexpensive, right? You don't need a lot of equipment and those things, but they're submaximal, so it's an estimation, so they're going to be off a little bit, right? You can't really publish them from a research standpoint. There may be some things that we have to consider about measuring heart rate. It can be affected by stuff. Lab tests are accurate. You get a lot of really useful information. But they can be expensive. They can be more time consuming. People have to go to a certain facility to do them. So you just have to try to balance out what we're going to do. But as the advent of technology, right? So I've had my Apple Watch almost a year, and you know it seems pretty good. What Apple released a bunch of stuff, was it last week or was it Monday? Like all their new stuff that they're doing, like their new product stuff. I'm sure they're telling me that my watch is obsolete and I need a new one now all of a sudden, and they can go jump in the lake for all of that. But you know, we've got stuff. You can track how far you're going. You can track how fast you're going. You can simultaneously track your heart rate. These things will now tell you what your VO2 max estimation is going to be based upon all of this. As you guys will see when we do prescription, I think for some of them, you can set them up to where it will like vibrate or ping at you when you get your heart rate. You can set like, okay, today I need to be in this zone, right? And it will tell you when you're in that zone, or it will, you get in there and it will tell you when you leave that zone and kind of how to set up your pace. So we have some reasonable technologies to kind of help us do all of these things. Okay. All right, questions about that? Let's take a couple of minute break, okay? And then we'll come back and we'll talk a little bit about the FIT principle and stuff, like how we need to train if we want to train aerobically. Then we'll get you guys out of here and you can, you know, get on to the test or project that's due, and you guys can get on out of here to whatever fun spring break things you're doing that you don't want to share with the rest of us. Going to Mexico or Florida or Colorado, or maybe you're just going to go home and nap, which sounds delightful for me at this point in my life. Okay, so now we're going to talk about training, okay? Much like you need to do certain things to make your maximal strength go up, let's say you want to train to make your VO2 max go up so that you can beat Michaela at her half marathon. All right. Michaela, you're running a half marathon again anytime soon?
Yeah, June.
In June, okay. Are we training?
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay. How many days per, we'll do the fit. How many days per week? 3?
4 days of that.
3 or 4, okay. Okay, good. Frequency, right? How long do you train during each session? I'm sure it varies, but what's like an average?
Yeah, right now I'm doing 3.5 months.
Okay. Okay. Doing a long run on the weekend?
Yeah.
Okay. Road is running. What about intensity? Are you tracking your training intensity?
Yeah, I try to do 8 miles.
An 8-mile pace. Okay. I tried to run half a mile at an 8-minute mile pace yesterday, and it was not good for Dr. Black. So, Michaela literally running circles around you over there at the track. All right. So, the same principles that we applied to resistance training with frequency, intensity, time, type, progression, repetition, overload, specificity, we can apply to aerobic training. Okay. The same idea that the amount of weight that you're lifting and the number of reps and sets you're doing give us this volume of training with resistance training. The same kind of thing, just like what we went through with Michaela, will tell us what aerobic training volume is. If you want to adapt, guess what you have to do? Pardon? More than what I do. What do we call that? Overload. Did you guys at least get that right on the test a little bit? Okay, good. You have to overload. How do I overload? Well, higher intensity. So run faster. Okay? Train, go longer. Do an extra day per week. The mode gets a little bit tricky because VO2 max is very dependent upon training mode. So if you run, you get better at running. If you bike, you get better at biking. Your running VO2 max doesn't really go up very much unless you're super duper unfit, okay, in that particular way. So change one of these things, increase your volume to some extent, and that should help drive the adaptations that we're going to be able to see. Okay, so if we look at all of this, just like with the FIT principle, we're using specificity and progressive overload. Okay, this is what we're going to do. When you guys get back from spring break, you're going to do another program critique. Okay, you're going to find an aerobic training program. Kayla can critique her own running program if she wants. All of this. Okay, but you guys find one, and then we'll see where we go. All right. So that's what we're going to try to do. All right. So if we want to make your VO2 max go up, let's talk about the usefulness of intensity versus frequency versus time on. So this is where we have some really interesting research. Okay. Generally, the thing that you need to do to make your VO2 max go up is to increase intensity. Okay. If you're jogging, you need to jog faster. I'm sorry, it hurts and it sucks. I know, I'm right there with you. Okay, but you need to go faster. Okay? Intensity seems to be one of the primary drivers. Okay? Your intensity probably needs to be somewhere above 50% of your VO2 max. Okay, which is going to be, means that your heart rate during exercise needs to be somewhere over about 50% of what we call heart rate reserve, which I'll show you guys how we calculate in a few slides. Okay, so it probably needs, unless you're very unfit like me, it probably needs to be like a brisk jog or faster. Okay. When I go and stumble around the track over at Sarkey's or the Huff, I see lots of people that aren't probably pushing the intensity enough for their age. It's just the thing that people miss out on the most. Okay, and we'll talk about you can do some really high intensity stuff that may actually be really good. Duration matters up to about 40 minutes. Okay, up to about 40 minutes. You can run longer than 40 minutes at the same pace, and you're not going to get any additional benefits really above and beyond the 40 minutes. That is not to say that if you're training for a particular race and that race or event takes longer than 40 minutes, that you don't need to run longer than 40 minutes. It's just that your VO2 max isn't going to go up appreciably more by doing all of that. Okay, so up to about 40 and we're good to go. Frequency, the times per week, more days per week is good to about 5 days. A 6th and a 7th day don't have any really additional effects beyond doing simply 5. Okay. So when I see that, like our cross country team, that they like train 7 days a week and they do like 2 times a day, and their race is 5 kilometers, and yet they'll go run 10 miles at a time. And those things, right, like 5 kilometers is like 2.5 miles. And they run way too long and things. I think their duration and frequency is probably too high. I need to work on intensity. Okay. Progressive overload, just like last time, right? When it begins to get easy. If a given distance or time gets easy at a given pace, at a given number of days per week, then make it hard again. Go faster, go longer, go another day per week or something like that. Okay. Again, this is the thing. In some ways, aerobic exercise sucks worse than resistance training, right? because you're you're there for like a half an hour, just constantly doing it. At least when you lift weights, you get to stop and take a break in between some of these things. It's just constant. And so most people underestimate intensity and they like it when it's easy. Okay? We train to get a little bit better, it becomes easy, and you kind of get stuck in the midst of all of these things. Okay. All right. So how much should we do for kind of general health benefits? All right. So the health benefits, these are the aerobic exercise sort of recommendations that we saw, the 150 minutes, right, of moderate intensity activity. Okay. 30 minutes, moderate intensity, 5 days per week, 20 to 25 minutes of vigorous activity, 3 days per week. Okay. This is the ACSM guidelines. You can accumulate them in bouts that last 10 minutes at a time. We used to say that it had to be 10 minutes long to count. And then we decided that we thought that would make it easier. That people are like, oh, I can go for 10 minutes in the morning, right? If you got 10 minutes first thing in the morning, you could go. You got 10 minutes on your lunch break or in between things at work that you could do, maybe. You 10 minutes at home, as opposed to do I have a half an hour to go all at once. We thought break it up, it'll be more palatable to people. People still didn't do it. And so now we're just like, we don't care, just go. Like anything, doesn't have to be 10 minutes long, go get 5. Do whatever. So that's where these guidelines have come from. Okay. Those are the guidelines. We're going to define moderate intensity at maybe 40 to 60% of your VO2 max, and then the vigorous intensity is somewhere north of 60% of your VO2 max. For most of you guys, this isn't enough. If you want to make your VO2 max go up, this is not going to be enough. Okay, the intensity won't be high enough, or the time won't be long enough to really be able to push on what those things are. Okay? It's probably not going to be enough. This will give you health benefits, but it won't give you in kind of normal, active college age individuals. It's not going to give you a lot of fitness benefits. Okay. And so what we tend to try to do then for the fitness benefits is add 3 to 5 days, 20 to 60 minutes per session. So maybe go a little bit longer. Okay. Maybe go another day per week. We go one less day per week, we go harder. And then their recommendation is what they're going to say is 40 to 85% of, don't worry about what VO2 reserve is, but it's 40 to 85% of VO2 max or what we call a heart rate reserve, which I'll talk about in a couple of slides. Okay. This just means that for most of you guys, you probably need to be above 60% of heart rate reserve. You're all relatively fit. Some of your friends that are maybe in other majors that aren't quite so active, we don't want to name names, chemistry majors, I'm looking at you. We keep tabs in the lab on like what majors we think are the most and the least fit. So that when we need to try to target recruitment things, we'll try to go over and see if we can email those people specifically. When I do OU Massimo, I can pick people by majors or by college. And so we target people a little bit differently that way. And so that's kind of how we arrive at those things. Okay, we already talked about the needed stimulus, so I covered that one. Okay. We talked about this. We talked about training duration. This is just sort of training for what they're going to say, health versus fitness versus performance. Okay. And so these are the general things. The ones on the far left, that's going to be enough that you meet the aerobic exercise guidelines. That's the 150 minutes per week, right, that you're going to manage. Kind of, that's going to be the one on the left. The one in the middle should be pretty reasonable for you guys to become more fit, right, to make your VO2 max go up some. And then our kind of performance-based, athlete-based things on the far right. If you're really wanting to run a 5K very fast, you really want to do a good time on your half marathon and not just kind of make it through, you probably need to be working on these. You guys will note that what happens on this end is that time goes up, intensity goes up, and the number of days per week is also going to go up. Okay. All right. So here's what we're going to talk about now. Next thing is going to be a calculation that you guys will do on the test. So we need to know how we're going to do these things. when we want to prescribe exercise, okay? It's great to say, I'm going to go run today. I'm going to try to go at a certain pace. I'm going to run at a 9-minute per mile pace or an 8-minute per mile pace or whatever that's going to be, okay? And that's great, but the best way to do this, the best way to do it is we need to be at a certain percentage of our maximum VO2. And the easiest way to achieve that, because it's hard for us to measure oxygen consumption during exercise without special equipment, is to use your heart rate. And what we want to do is we want to use this concept of this parameter called heart rate reserve. We abbreviate that as HRR. Okay? The percentage of heart rate reserve, okay, basically approximates your percentage of VO2 max. Okay? So if you need to run at 70% of VO2 max, and you want to run at a heart rate that puts at 70% of your heart rate. That idea makes sense. So in order to understand this and how we're going to use it, we have to figure out first, what the hell is heart rate reserve? What does this mean? Okay. And we need to know a couple of parameters so that we can calculate this and so that it will make sense. Okay. To get heart rate reserve, we need to know two things. We need to know your resting heart rate, okay? We need to know your max heart rate, okay? We need to know your max heart rate. I do this on my phone, or do I have to? This is how little I know. Can I get my resting heart rate? Yes. Okay. My heart rate right now, it says, is 85 beats per minute. It said it was 77, 18 minutes ago. So we're going to say, I have my watch. Ideally, we would get this, like if you would wear it when you're sleeping, okay? And if you can get your resting heart rate when you're sleeping, that's going to be the best way to do it. If we measure it in a lab, we have you come in, we have you lay down, we turn the lights off, and we let you basically try to fall asleep for about 20 minutes, and then we measure your heart rate in bed, okay? So let's just say, though, my watch tells me my resting heart rate is 77 beats per minute. Okay? Now, we also need to know my max heart rate. Okay, my max heart rate. How do we find my max heart rate? Well, 220 minus my age. Very good. Okay? This is the classical equation to do. There are some newer equations where it's 207 minus 70% of your age, or it's 211 minus 64% of your age. We did this last semester for me, and we got the exact same number out of all of them. I don't know. We're scientists. We're never happy with it. We're taking something that works perfectly well and trying to make it infinitesimally better because we think it'll make us famous. I want us to use this equation. Okay, to get your age predicted max heart rate, it's 220 minus your age. So 220 minus 43 for me, right? That is going to be what? Math in my head. 177, right? Yeah, 177. Okay. This is now that we have these two things. Okay. We know my max, we know my resting. Heart rate reserve is the difference, okay? Max and rest. So we're going to take 177, oh, look, minus 77. So my math is easy. My heart rate, I did not plan that, I promise you. My heart rate reserve is 100 beats per minute. Okay. Do you all see how I calculate that? Heart rate reserve is the range that you have to increase your heart rate and therefore increase your cardiac output above resting levels up to some maximal capacity. That's what we've got there. So that's heart rate reserve. So now we know my heart rate reserve, and we say, okay, well, that's great, Dr. Black, but now what do I do? All right. I want to go exercise at, let's just say, I need to be at 70% of my heart rate reserve when I'm going to go exercise. So once we know this, we can calculate. Is it okay if I erase, guys, if I erase this, is that going to be okay? So I want to be at, during exercise, I need to go run at 70% heart rate reserve. So in order to achieve this, I need what we're going to call a target heart rate. I need to get to some number of beats per minute in order to reach 70% heart rate reserve. Now, this is where this gets to be a little bit complicated. Okay. In order to calculate target heart rate, we have to take our heart rate reserve, okay, and multiply that by our percentage. So we need to take 0.7 multiplied by my heart rate reserve, so 100, right, multiplied by 0.7. So we're going to get 70 beats per minute. You will note that 70 beats per minute is lower than my resting heart rate. So I'm not going to exercise at 70, okay? But I need 70% of reserve, and then I have to add that back into what we would consider to be my resting heart rate. So I'm going to take my 70, I'm going to add it back into my 77. So if I'm going to go exercise today, and I need to run at 70% of heart rate reserve, I need to go and run at some intensity that's going to elicit a heart rate of 147 beats per minute. Okay? And then when I get to 147, then I need to hold that pace, and that will keep me there. If it begins to tick up over 147, then slow down. Okay? If it stays under, then I may need to speed up a little bit. Does that make sense, guys? In an ideal world, every time we go and we're going to do a bout of aerobic exercise, we should do something like this every time. We should go with some intent on, if I want my VO2 max to go up, I need to be at some percentage, so I better go and train at that level. Okay. All right, so the last thing that we're going to do, that you guys are going to turn in, and you're going to get credit for having come to class the Wednesday before spring break. You are going to calculate your own target heart rate. Okay? Your own target heart rate. So here's what I want. I want you guys to calculate your target heart rate if you were to go and exercise at 83% of your heart rate reserve. 83% of your heart rate reserve. If you've got a fitness tracker watch or something and it will tell you your resting heart rate, great. If not, get your phone out and we'll do it the old-fashioned way, and you can palpate on your carotid and time yourself for 15 seconds, count your heartbeats, multiply by 4, and you've got a resting heart rate. Then do your age predicted max, and then go from there. Okay? Write your name on your piece of paper, put your calculation on your piece of paper. And when you think you've got it, we'll walk through a couple of people and see if you're right. For my folks on Zoom, y'all please do this too, although nobody's left on Zoom. So there we go.
Will you?
Yeah, no, that's fine. 83%. Find your target heart rate to exercise at 83% of heart rate resistance.